is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
The world we live in today may seem to be a progressive landscape that promotes ideas such as freedom, liberty, and justice. Yet not even a century ago, a division was so evident that even the basic principles of a democracy were affected. For people of color, this division was a basic part of life. People of color lacked resources to grow a community, weren't allowed to be integrated with white people, and it even went as far as not being allowed to have a say in a democracy, the right to vote. The lack of justice towards minorities sparked many movements, such as the Civil Rights Movement, which lessened the divide between white people and people of color. However, it was a key Supreme Court decision that not only made this possible, but revolutionized this movement, initiating a turning point in American history. This landmark verdict is known as Smith v. Allwright and is highlighted by the actions of Dr. Lonnie E. Smith. An activist has sued county election official S.S. Allwright for rejecting his right to a ballot for a primary election within his home state of Texas. This legal pursuit from Dr. Smith played a major role in accelerating a movement that changed society, not just for the equality of African Americans, but to show that no one is above justice. Dr. Lonnie E. Smith was born in 1901 in Yoakum, Texas, to Gus and Sarah Smith. After graduating from Providence Hill High School in 1919, Dr. Smith attended Prairie View A&M College for 2 years, before getting accepted for dental study from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. After receiving his Doctor of Dental Surgery degree, Smith opened a dental practice in Galveston, Texas in 1924. He would marry and move to Houston, where he continued his practice of dentistry. Smith would live a relatively normal life until he attempted to vote in 1940. On July 27, 1940, Smith was met with prejudiced actions in Houston when he attempted to vote in the Democratic Party primary. Many people of color had been met with the same fate when attempting to vote ever since 1923. Nonetheless, Smith, offended by this decision, sued county election official S.S. Allwright for denying his right to vote in the primary. This situation wasn't just happening in Houston, but all over Texas. Since 1923, the Democratic Party excluded people of color from voting in the state primary. According to Robert E. Cushman, a Cornell government professor in the mid-20th century, the Democratic Party kept people of color from voting in the primary as a, quote, way to disenfranchise people of color, as well as preserving white supremacy in the South. The use of white primaries, combined with other ways used to disenfranchise African Americans, such as poll taxes, literacy tests, and physical intimidation, deprived minority Texans of the right to vote. There have been several instances of people fighting against this situation before Smith v. Allwright. One of the first legal actions taken in retaliation to white primaries was the case of Nixon v. Herndon. Ellie Nixon was an African American citizen of Texas who attempted to vote on July 26, 1924. Due to the decision made by the Democratic Party, Nixon was denied the right to vote. He later sued the judges of elections and argued that this decision was violating his 14th and 15th Amendment rights. The defendants tried to dismiss this case under the fact that the subject was political and therefore did not fall under the jurisdiction of the district court. This was later taken up to the National Supreme Court, specifically the Taft Court, and ultimately decided in a unanimous court decision that this did violate the 14th Amendment. However, it wasn't long until this verdict was changed due to another Supreme Court decision. On July 28, 1934, another African American citizen of Texas, R.R. Grovey, attempted to vote in the Democratic Party primary election, but was denied just like Nixon. Similar to Nixon's decision, Grovey sued and argued that it violated his rights under the 15th Amendment and the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment. Sadly, the verdict on this case was less favorable than Nixon v. Herndon, with the Supreme Court at this time, the Hughes Court, deciding that white primaries do not violate both the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, due to the party in this case being a voluntary political association. 10 years later, on January 12, 1944, Smith's lawsuit against Allwright was brought to the Stone Court, the national Supreme Court at that time. While Smith saw white primaries as a violation of his 14th and 15th Amendment rights, the defendants argued otherwise. The defense argued, similar to the verdict of Grovey v. Townsend, that the Democratic Party was a private association and therefore the state could not be held accountable for its racially discriminatory policy. The court's ultimate verdict rejected this argument and made it clear that the use of white primaries was a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments. The Texas policy that empowered political parties and allowed these parties to make their own rules violated the Constitution would have led to racial discrimination. The Democratic Party may be a voluntary association, but concerning primary elections, the court found that they were conducted by the party on the state's authority. The court reasoned that citizens, regardless of their race, have the same right to participate in a primary election just like they do during general elections without racial discrimination. As a result of this decision, within the span of 4 years, the number of registered black voters rose in Texas from 200,000 to 800,000, and by 1952, reached over 1 million. By 1940, only 3% of Southern blacks were voters. The decision, however, increased this number to 20%. The invalidation for an all-white primary by the Supreme Court was a crucial contribution that led to this dramatic increase, a turning point that would change how American politics are viewed. This, however, was not the only turning point. African Americans' willingness to vote not only increased political participation, but even led to the opening of additional polling places in black churches and schools across the South. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People would even be stated as proclaiming Smith v. Allwright as a, quote, giant milestone in the progress of Negro Americans towards full citizenship. It becomes more clear that the court's decision did not only spark a change, but a political revolution. The surge in black voters was evident, especially because no other ruling ever had an impact as consequential as Smith v. Allwright did. It would even influence future rulings such as Elmore v. Rice, a case held at a district court in South Carolina that further ruled the Democratic Party's exclusion of African Americans was unconstitutional. The plaintiff lawyer for Smith v. Allwright, Thurgood Marshall, would even go on to become the first black Supreme Court justice only 23 years later in 1967. Truly showing the extent of this ruling as it propelled minority Americans to have roles that were never seen as a possibility at the time. A true turning point was achieved through this, as it increased not only black voter participation, but even influenced future rulings and leaders that would go forward to revolutionize the politics of the United States. Throughout history, racial inequality has put a wall in front of people of color, preventing them from achieving their hopes and dreams. They had to go out of their way just so they wouldn't be seen by white people, even having to use different facilities that were meant to make them feel lesser. African Americans were open to discrimination wherever they went, even being physically harmed without repercussions to the assailant. With all the actions put in place to intentionally hinder them, something had to be done. After the final decision of the Smith v. Allwright case, the discriminatory practices surrounding voting seemed to finally begin to unravel. After so many years, people of color were now allowed to vote in Texas primaries. Dr. Smith would even go on to become a Democratic Precinct Committee member, in the same precinct where he was once denied a ballot. Minorities finally could have the voice they so long lacked, and although there still is work that needs to be done, this decision set the precedent that change was achievable, taking the civil rights movement from a tumultuous beginning to a movement powerful enough to inspire people, and show that if we unite to make change, it could happen. The Smith v. Allwright decision was one that not only revolutionized the movement, but changed the voting system. The actions taken by Dr. Lonnie E. Smith were bold as he attempted to fight for something that was never seen to be a possibility. However, he, along with others, showed us otherwise. American politics would never be the same. It propelled minorities to possess a voice they so long lacked. It brought new leaders, such as Thurgood Marshall, who would continue his fight for civil justice, even as the first justice of color on the Supreme Court. It even brought a movement to its ultimate goal of abolishing a divide embedded so deep within society. The question if you could vote or not was no longer up to a party to decide. The ruling of Smith v. Allwright set the precedent that all voices must be heard, whether black or white. It proved that liberty was achievable as well as attainable, and that no one is ever above justice.